Alright, so this is numbers 18 through 23. I've already done these using the quadratic formula programmed into my calculator. There's good things and bad things. The tough part is that it always gives you, if the answer is some sort of a radical, it'll give you the answer as a decimal. There's ways of getting around it, but sometimes just biting the bullet and doing the quadratic formula is the best way. Numbers 18 and 19, if you look at the direction, it just says solve, unlike 20 through 23 where it specifically says use the quadratic formula. So solve means that I can factor this like I've been doing since 8th, 9th, and intro and intermediate algebra. First thing I see that there's no common terms here, so I'm simply going to draw my parenthesis here. To get x squared, that's x times x. This is a positive sign, which tells me my signs are the same. I look at the sign of my middle term, it's negative. So the signs are the same and they're both negative. Factors of 33 is only one set of factors, 3 and 11. And you can see that's a minus 3x. This is a minus 11, which adds up to be a minus 14. So if this times this equals 0, then either x minus 3 equals 0 or x minus 11 equals 0, which implies then that x is either equal to 3 or x is equal to a positive 11. And you've got letter D for your answer. Alright, number 19. First thing I see with 19, if I write it down here, 6x squared equal to 42x. What I want to do is put both my terms on the same side of the equation. 6x squared minus 42x equals 0. I see it's a quadratic. It's a second degree equation, which tells me that at most I've got two answers. Now sometimes those answers may be the same, not the case here. In order to have two answers the same, it'd have to be a perfect square trinomial, like x squared plus 14x plus 49. That's not the case. But if I look at answers C and D, there's only one answer. No, ain't going to work. So it's going to either be A or B. I can kind of deduce this. I could conceivably plug 0 and 7, those answers in. If I plug in 0, left side equals the right side, and 7. There's ways of doing it just by using some common sense, but algebraically what I would do is to factor out the common term is 6x. This would leave me x minus 7 equal to 0. Now, if 6x times x minus 7 equals 0, then either 6x equals 0 or x minus 7 equals 0. If I divide both sides by 6 here, one of the solutions is 0. And if I bring the 7 onto the other side, add 7, I get a positive 7. So you can see where it's letter A. Number 20. All right, the directions for 20 to 23 says specifically use the quadratic formula. So what have I got here? X squared minus 8x plus 65 equals 0. All the terms are on the same side of the equation, so my A value is 1, my B value is a negative 8, and my C value is positive 65. So the quadratic formula, x is equal to the opposite sign of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So the opposite of a negative 8, the opposite sign would be a positive 8, plus or minus the square root of a negative 8 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is a 65, or is 65. All of this divided by twice a. If a is 1, then twice a is 2. So this becomes 8 plus or minus the square root of 64, 8 squared. 4 times 1 times 65 is 260, but that's going to be a negative all over 2. This simplifies to 8 plus or minus the square root of a negative 196 divided by 2. So I see that this is an imaginary number, so I'm going to write this as 8 plus or minus the square root of 196 times the square root of negative 1 All divided by 2 becomes 8. 196 is the perfect square. That's 14. The square root of -1 is the letter I. 2 is the denominator, but if I look at this very closely, I see that 2 is a factor of 8 and 14. So if I factor out a 2 out of the numerator, 4 plus or minus 7i, all of this divided by 2. And then my denominator is 2. You can see that these 2's would cancel out, leaving you the correct answer of 4 plus or minus 7i. So you can see where the answer is letter B. Alright, number 21. We've got x squared equal to 12 plus 5x. My first job is to bring both of these terms onto the same to the left side. X squared minus 5x minus 12 equal to 0. I realize I can't factor this. Factors of 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Nothing's going to total minus 5. So quadratic formula, A is equal to 1, B is -5, and C is -12. So x equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. The opposite of b, the opposite sign, the opposite of a -5 is a +5. Plus or minus -5, which is b squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is a -12. All over twice a. If a is 1, twice 1 is 2. So simplifying, I get 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 48 minus 4 times 1 times a -12 is a +48. So this is 5 plus or minus the square root of, looks to be 73. All of this divided by 2. That was pretty straightforward. Alright, so I'm not sure which answer that is. 21, it looks like letter D. Letter D winner. Alright, number 22 starts out with x squared plus 35 equal to 5x. Gotta bring this guy over. X squared minus 5x plus 35 equals 0. Quadratic formula. Minus b, the opposite of b is 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 35. I could have written this down here. A is 1, b is -5, c is 35. Alright, let me finish that off. All divided by twice a. If a is 1, twice 1 is 2. So this is x equal to 5 plus or minus the square root. Let's see, -5 squared would be 25 minus 100, minus 140. So this looks like it's going to be 5 times the square root of a -115. 25 minus 140 minus 115 all over twice a. Alright, so you can see this is an imaginary number. It's obvious. So it's 5 plus or minus. I'm going to write this as the square root of 115 times the square root of -1 divided by 2. So it looks like we've got 5 plus or minus I, the square root of 115 over 2. And what he did here was to write each part of the numerator over the denominator. He wrote this as 5/2 plus or minus the square root of 115 over 2. And he put the I out here because this is like having I over 1. So by rights, that I is in the numerator. So if you're wondering how it got to be there, it's I is the same thing as I over 1. Now, he didn't have to do that, but that's the way he wrote this answer. I mean, that would have been just as good. All right, 23. Put it up here somewhere. 23 is 3t squared minus 7t equal to 1. We bring this over. 3t squared minus 7t minus 1. equal to 0. My A value is 3. My B value is -7. And my C value is -1. So the quadratic formula, the opposite of B, the opposite of a -7 is 7, plus or minus the square root of -7, which is B squared, minus 4 times A, which is 3 times C, which is a -1. All of this divided by twice A. If A is 3, twice A is 6. So this becomes 7 plus or minus the square root. -7 squared is 49, plus an additional 12 more. -4 times 3 times -1 is a positive 12. 49 12 equals 61, and that's all divided by 6. Here's a case where he didn't separate it. He could have wrote this as 7 over 6 plus or minus the square root of 61 over 6, but he left it alone. So we're in business.